So for this one, I'm taking you guys to the Digital Academy basement laboratory. Um, it's a little windy out there, so I retreated to the basement lab. Okay, this is going to be a presentation on the social issues student forum. Okay, and what I'm kind of looking for from you guys, and I'm going to do a little bit of a example of what's to come. Designed to work best with headphones. Alright guys, next slide. Remember, this is, if you guys are feeling a bit overwhelmed and not ready for this yet, you can stockpile this video for later, but this is for all the social issues students, and it relates to the social issues forum, the last evaluative component. Next slide. Okay guys, I threw on a hat just so the glare off, the shine off my noggin doesn't hurt your eyes. This is the Social Issues Forum 2020, Human Services Foundations, HSF 1035. Presentation. Oh, Mike, this slide seems a little bit boring. This looks like it could be, digitally remixed. Oh, here we go. Next slide. So I want to share a story here, and it's a story about a pink elephant. And you may have heard me talk about this before, but I think I'm going to go a lot deeper today. So you see this elephant here being held by this piece of rope. You're like, man, this elephant should clearly be strong enough to break that, but what you don't see is that since this elephant was an infant, it was held by chains to that spike, and it learned that it couldn't get away, and it created this psychological idea that it was trapped. And so now it's like what's holding it to that peg is more the psychology, the psychological bondage, as opposed to actual physical resistance, right? Because as the elephant's getting older, you make that chain lighter and lighter and lighter, even though it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger, but it's got that reinforced memory that it can't break it. It's learned that it can't break it. It's learned that in that situation, it's helpless. And it's internalized that model so much that that's what it manifests and plays out. Learned helplessness is a behavior typical of an organism, human or animal, that has endured repeated painful or otherwise negative stimuli, which it was unable to escape or avoid. Eventually, the animal will stop trying to avoid the stimuli or stimulus and behave as if it is utterly helpless. As if it's utterly helpless to change the situation. You see that picture of the elephant, it's like the elephant's held back not by the puny rope, but by its belief systems. Are you too? Even when opportunities to escape are presented. This learned helplessness will prevent action. Right? Just look at that picture. It's a destroyed and mastered psychology that allows that to occur. Not the physical strength of the rope. Learned helplessness really relates to this idea of having uncontrollable bad events. Right? Often repeated, often over and over, that are associated with this deep perceived sense of a lack of control. A feeling of not being able to do anything about it. A powerlessness. A helplessness. And that where this becomes really problematic is that it can get generalized, right? And what that means is it's not just that the elephant learns how to be, that it's helpless in that rope situation. It actually generalizes that helplessness to everything. it generalizes it, makes it makes it its model for understanding its own subjective personal universe. So why this topic matters, and as you can maybe tell, I'm trying to kind of give an example of how I want you to structure your presentation, and I think this why it matters part is important when you're doing a presentation, to really focus on why should the audience care at all what you're saying. I think it's a useful perspective to be coming from as the presenter. 20% of Canadians will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. 1 in 5. Right? But how do you even know about the numbers? Almost half who feel they've suffered from anxiety or depression, if you ask them, have never gone for help. Right, man? And I would say that in this class, we talk a lot about psychology-related stuff. But if you're dealing with some heavy stuff, I highly recommend talking to a therapist. I highly recommend it. It's a sign of strength. Okay, next slide. So if you look at this learned helplessness experiment, I won't show actual footage of it because it'll probably get me pulled right away off YouTube. But in this experiment, a brutal experiment, they shocked dogs repeatedly in a situation where the dogs couldn't get away. And then in a new experiment, they compared those dogs to another group of dogs that hadn't had that happen. Right, and they find that then you shock the dog that hadn't had that happen and it runs away right away. You do it to the other dog and it just lays down and starts to take it. And this experiment was focused on how helplessness is learned. Seligman's study of learned helplessness, dogs were placed in a two-sided box. Dogs that had no prior experience with being unable to escape a shock would quickly jump over the hurdle in the center of the box to land on the safe side. Dogs that had previously learned that escape was impossible would stay on the side of the box in which the shock occurred, not even trying to get over the hurdle. They lost the belief that trying does anything. They've learned to be helpless. The core idea here is that the impact of learned helplessness has been demonstrated experimentally in a number of different animal species. Right, but its effect can also be seen in people. There may not be experiments on it, but, well, not those specific experiments. Consider one often used example. A child who performs poorly on math tests and assignments will quickly begin to feel that nothing he does will have any effect on his math performance. When later faced with any type of math-related task, he may experience a sense of helplessness. Right? It's like the cognitive priming. It's like it becomes a lens through which you experience new experiences, interpret new experiences. Learned helplessness has also been associated with several different psychological disorders. So, associated with is the key word there. Key part. Depression, anxiety, phobia, shyness, loneliness. Okay, these are all things that can be exacerbated or made worse or more severe or more intense by this experience of learned helplessness. So it's not, they're different things, but they're highly correlated. They're highly interconnected. I like to use this picture because for so many of us, it feels like there's this thing in our way. And if we could just deal with that thing, if we could just get past or see over or get around or under that wall or find a way through it, that pot of gold's on the other side. And sometimes it's getting out of our own way. Next slide. So, if you're interested in this topic, Seligman's book, Learned Optimism. So now think about what that would mean, right? It's quite literally presented as a counter to learned helplessness. How to change your mind in your life. Increasing engagement, increasing meaning, increasing positive emotion, challenging negative thoughts, playing to your strengths, counting your blessings, having some appreciation, seeking meaning and purpose. And that you can actually learn to have a healthier mindset just like you can learn to have an unhealthy mindset. Right? And this guy's a big name in the subfield of psychology called positive psychology. Now I like this. It's like, this is a compare and contrast thing, right? It's like when we're in a state of learned helplessness, when we're in a state of this negative thought cycle, it feels like everything's impermanent. It'll never go away. It'll always be how it is now. It's pervasive. It feels like it's bleeding into every domain of life, every area of life. It feels highly personalized. But as you start to develop a position of learned optimism, we start to see that a lot of these things that seem permanent are actually temporary, current situation included. That this uncertainty and anxiety we're speaking a lot of it is local. And what I mean by that is it's being caused by something. It's not like it's just random. Our lives have been drastically changed. And it's external. I think my video is covering up that part of it, but it says external. It more accurately reflects this idea that, like, some things are sometimes things are what they are, and it's not personal. It's actually the opposite of personal, even though it feels personal. Not much to say on this one. I just have always liked this picture. Slides like this are hit or miss. Sometimes they get laughs, sometimes there's crickets, but Next slide. So how do we start to move towards overcoming a sense of learned helplessness? How do we start to become more optimistic and more self-dependent? All right, so I kind of started this presentation by outlining an issue. And now I'm going to talk about some potential ways to address the issue. And I think that's part of the idea I want you guys to be focusing on, is a little bit about describing the problem, what are some of the main ideas around it, and then also, strategies for action. And don't worry about writing anything down like that. I'll have more detailed instruction in a minute. I think we could all reflect on that for a sec, especially with how, if we're being honest, with how hectic our thinking's been lately. And understandably so. Domain specifically, external reason, it makes sense. This is a crazy time. It's not you. Be careful, and this is for me too, be careful how you let that self-talk run wild. So now at this point, I'm going to outline some ways to cultivate healthy ways of thinking. Okay, so up until this point, I've been kind of talking about how how we get into these negative patterns and how they get stamped almost, and how it feels like we're in this perpetual locked cycle. But a lot of it is this pattern, this learned pattern, and it's not all that. There's other things going on. There's obviously biological and neurological and sociological, all kinds of factors affecting somebody dealing with a intense situation. But there's a cognitive or a thinking based aspect of it. All right, and we're going to talk about that now from kind of a cognitive behavioral therapy perspective. See, the problem is that this negative self-talk can become an automatic response. Meaning it can just become the way that we think. the way that we process things, our interpretive lens. So this is one of those things that's like, this is one of the biggest examples of something that's like, it's all what you make it. If you take this seriously and you actually do it. And it's one of those things that you actually have to call yourself out on it. And you have to understand when you're starting to go down a path you've been down a million times. And can you actually stop? Can you stop that chain of thought? Okay, thought stopping is a technique for interrupting repetitive, unhelpful thinking that impedes action and confidence with positive and empowering substitutions, substituting in healthier ways of thinking. Right after identifying negative self-talk, clients need to develop positive statements to replace intrusive negative thoughts. And you know, some of this positive thinking, and this isn't just saying like positive flowery thinking, this is saying like actually getting serious about this idea that your thoughts have a huge impact on your mood. And if you're walking around in a negative bitterness all day, that's going to affect your entire life. And changing that has to include mental discipline. Another idea that you hear a lot in this area is the idea of mindfulness. And, you know, people can make videos that talk all day about it. Really, it's this idea that so much of our anxiety and depression is either tied to our worries about what's coming later or our recollections of negativity that's happened in the past, or we should have done things different. And it's so much of it is either past or future focused, and that it's pulling us out of the moment. It's pulling us out of right now. Mindfulness is simply defined as awareness of the present experience with acceptance. Things are what they are right now. And I'd like to change some things, and I like some things, and you know, and again, easy to do when things are easy. Right? But it's this idea of helping people disengage, and mindfulness can be as simple as sitting in your basement in a chair by yourself. And you maybe heard me say this before, but closing your eyes and just picturing a white chalkboard that you're writing the letters on in black ink, and just picture yourself doing a 1. And fully picture yourself painting that, and then a 2, 3, 4, 5. What you'll find is you keep getting to like 2 or 3, and all of a sudden you're thinking about something completely different. And I think it's better, or not better, but it might be more effective for you if you don't view it as like a spiritual thing, but you view it as like a mental discipline thing about actually training focus, training yourself to notice how quick your mind is to just, you know, 1, 2, I gotta call back Robin, I gotta, you know, make a sandwich and blah, blah, blah. It's like your brain, you'll instantly notice how, you know, wild of a horse your mind is. You know, students often get a kick out of this picture. How often are we mindful? The first one, right? That person's walking, thinking about, you know, their husband or wife, thinking about bills, thinking about car troubles, thinking about, you know, they got to maybe do some public speaking. They got to get back to people with messages. The dog's like, oh, check out those trees. It's this idea that there's a therapeutic benefit of being connected in the moment and not being constantly distracted and lost in either thoughts of what's happened before or what's coming later. And then, you know, you can take this even another level, and this is what they call evidence finding. Beliefs may arise from faulty assumptions and other errors in thinking, or they may be based on emotions, not fact, especially if we're angry, especially if we're upset. Our ideas can be based on emotion. Unchallenged beliefs can limit new learning and can keep clients locked in old, ineffective ways of acting or thinking. You can get trapped in these ways, right? So that One technique they might actually do is have you, when you're in a really negative mood, write down some of the thoughts you're having and be very explicit and very specific. And then later, when you're not in such a bad mood, go back to it and challenge yourself on that. I've had this talk with some of you about even doing this sometimes when you're just trying to get through something at a personal level. You know, you wouldn't talk that mean to your friend, but sometimes we talk that mean to ourselves. All right, and so this is this idea of evidence finding as a cognitive behavioral therapy technique that teaches clients to be their own devil's advocate. Devil's advocate's a term that comes from, used to be a person, I don't know if it still exists, but it used to be a person that would follow around the Pope. Every time the Pope would have an idea, this person would present the counter idea. And the idea that was that the Pope constantly being exposed to that actually helped the Pope make his ideas better. Is there evidence in what you're thinking? You know, you got dumped, so now no one will ever like you. Like, you would never say that to your friend, oh, you got dumped. I use this joke all the time in the psych class, but you would never have your friend that just got dumped and you go meet them for a beer and you're like, oh, that's too bad. That relationship didn't work out. I guess you're, single for life. But we would say that to ourselves. Habits of thinking need not be forever. One of the most significant findings in psychology in the last 20 years, one of the most significant findings in psych in the last 20 years, is that individuals can choose the way they think. That's not saying that's easy. That's not saying you should be able to just do it and just get over things. It's not saying anything like that. It's just saying cognitively you possess the ability to do it. So here I just have some additional links. So if people were really interested in this presentation and wanted to go further, I have links here around learned helplessness in humans, some experiments looking at that, learned helplessness theory and practice, the generality of learned helplessness. So what happens when people have these negative experiences of failure and then that gets generalized or kind of applied to everything. A specific learned helpless model related to depression, and then a bunch of YouTube links. So I know you can't click on this because it's a video, but if you use your QR finder on your phone, all those QR codes there will link you to the videos. Okay, next slide. So that brings us to the main topic of the day, the social issues form assignment. This is going to be due on the 24th of April, and that's going to have to be a solid due date because that is the last day of the term, and marks will be due really quick after that, which you don't have to worry about, but I'm just saying that because it'll limit my ability to do something like give extensions and stuff like that. But that's not where your head needs to be right now because we still have almost a full month to do that, and I will be working on it with you and releasing more information on it as we go. But here is your initial presentation on it coming up now. Catch you on the next slide. So with these assignments, with this new digitalization situation to end the term, I'm trying to give a bunch of options, right? And I'm really hoping that giving all these options isn't being experienced by you guys as overwhelming. I hope it's letting you pick to do it in a way that makes sense and that is engageable and doable and kind of plays to your strengths a bit. So I'm basically going to give 4 options here. Option number 1, you can turn it into kind of a traditional paper. Okay, you can pick a topic, you can write a paper about it. As we get closer, I'll give out some specific guidelines for that. You can do something artistic. I don't want to put a ton of boundaries on that. That might mean different things to different people. I'll expect a certain level. I don't know how to, if you do something musical, if you do something drawing, like fine art wise, or this is the most open to different types of expression for an assignment that I've probably ever been. So you can do a lot of different things. You can do a traditional paper. If you want to just fire it out, you can turn it into an art project. You can make some kind of recording based presentation. Okay, I'd find it cool if some of you did this. Like you can either do some kind of video or some kind of podcast or some kind of audio. Okay, or I, the reason I'm hesitant here is in some situations, if you guys have a very specific reason why you think you want to do it that way, I would be willing to do it through Zoom. I don't want to be doing that, to be honest, with like 60 students. That's a scheduling nightmare, and I don't know if that's the best way, because that's also putting pressure on you to present really well live, one shot, where you could basically do the exact same thing with your webcam or with, you don't have to do video, or just with your phone recorder, and you could like, do it, and if you made a mistake, do it, try it again, and I don't know. I just think a recorded thing is maybe better than live, but and less of a scheduling issue. But again, it's an option if you can convince me that that's what works for you. Okay, but I'm kind of hoping that most people pick 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so in terms of process, okay, so I know a lot of you are like, hey, Mike, you're getting ahead of yourself. We're still working on test 2, and I know that. I'm at the point now where I have a long list of things that I want to make videos about. I need to start making chapter 1s for psych. I need to still make chapter 14 for social issues. I need to, make a bunch in digital literacy. So I just need to start firing these out. Okay, so if you want to focus on the test and just set this video aside for a week or two, that's totally fine. But maybe bookmark it or whatever. Okay, so by the time we get to April 10th, which is going to be when your test 2 is due. So by the time we get done with test 2, I want us to be able to transition into working on this. So I want you to basically have an idea of what topic you want to do. Okay, so I have here, everyone needs to pick their topic by the 10th. Please send me a brief email to touch base so that I have time to schedule things. That's in terms of what type. I would like you to actually let me know your topic and also what type of presentation you want to do. Now, again, if all of you are doing, if there's not a lot of you doing Zoom, then scheduling things isn't going to be as big of a deal, right? But if by the 10th you could just let me know your topic and your presentation method. Okay, so if you're doing something like artistic or something like that, this is going to be a little bit less relevant. But if you're doing something like a podcast episode, or you're doing a short info video, or if you're doing a normal paper, I would say this is kind of a presentation structure that seems to work, right? Starting out with some kind of opening hook. So like, for example, in the presentation I did today, I started out with the pink elephant. I told the story about how, that elephant psychology and how the elephant was being held by a psychological bondage rather than by physical strength. And I kind of made that point as my opening hook. Then I kind of started to move into some interesting information. And I talked about how, some of these experiments with Seligman's experiments, and depending on if you say you're doing something like poverty or you're doing something like unemployment, you might be talking about specific statistics, right? Then you might get into a little bit of an overview of the So depending on the topic, maybe you're telling me a bit about the history of the topic, or maybe maybe it's a very current thing that doesn't really have much of a history, and you're talking more about the context, like how it fits into things. Right, so like if you're doing the coronavirus, there's maybe not a huge history on the coronavirus unless you're looking at more general pandemics, but maybe you're looking at like the current political context in which that's happening. So whether you're doing historical or a contextual overview depends on the topic. And remember, contextual just means what's the situation in which it's happening? What's the context? What are some of the core issues associated with your topic? Like mine was the link to depression. Some strategies for action. A closing thought, maybe a quote, maybe an interesting statistic, maybe an example. All right, some links for further exploration. So if you remember, I kind of ended mine with, okay, so say you guys were really interested in this presentation, here's some QR links for where you can follow up and learn a little bit more. Okay, in terms of marking criteria, let me just do this. We're almost there. We just got a couple more slides. But I want to kind of be clear about this. And then I'm going to do a quick little follow-up video about topics. Okay, assignment marking key. So for this, I want to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to do it out of 50, 10 marks for how coordinated and clear the presentation is, 10 marks for creativity and novelty, 10 marks for depth, 10 for use of research, 10 for overall presentation impact. Now, that is a scale designed for in-person presentations, and I will adapt it on an individualized basis depending on different types of presentation strategies. All right, I don't know what else to say than that, but I'm not sure. That's the template I'm using. You guys are like, hey Mike, what? You forgot to put anything on this slide. Did I? Oh, topics. Okay, so that was so lame. But I'm gonna do a quick follow-up video. That's just a document overview to go into topics. Basically, you can talk about anything related to any of the topics we talked about in this course, right? So the major categories were things like health and mental health, crime and violence, poverty, unemployment, environmental issues, armed conflict. Okay, but again, I'm gonna do a quick follow-up video just to address the topics thing directly. Next slide.